In terms of raw military calculus, the operation appeared to be an extraordinary triumph. The Japanese Navy sacrificed only 29 aircraft, 64 men, and 5 midget submarines. However, as the pilots circled above the smoldering harbor preparing to return to their fleet, they noticed unsettling details that would later haunt them. The massive shoreline oil tanks holding millions of gallons of fuel, the submarine base, and the repaired dry docks all remained completely untouched, while the 3 American carriers were conspicuously absent. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, flying an Aichi D-3A dive bomber in the second wave, arrived to find the USS Arizona already reduced to a burning wreck, her forward magazines having detonated in a cataclysmic explosion that killed 1,177 men. As Abe dropped his ordnance on the remaining seaworthy targets, the doubts that had plagued him on the freezing deck of the Akagi were not resolved by the inferno below. Instead, the smoke and fire only fueled further uncertainty. Aboard the flagship Akagi, Commander Fuchida urgently advised Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo to launch a third strike specifically to obliterate the critical fuel reserves and repair facilities. Nagumo refused, reasoning that the First Air Fleet had achieved its primary objective and, with the element of surprise lost, they must withdraw before the unlocated American carriers could launch a counterattack. A decision that was tactically defensible, but strategically ruinous. While the battleships Japan had sunk would eventually be salvaged and the lost aircraft replaced, the decision to spare the logistical infrastructure ensured that Pearl Harbor would remain operational as the primary forward base for the Pacific Fleet throughout the war. As the Japanese task force steamed back toward home waters, the pilots began to process a troubling realization. Although they had achieved tactical surprise, the sheer scale of the American base and its visible industrial capacity suggested an enemy far more resilient than their intelligence had predicted. The question of American industrial depth would be answered with brutal mathematical precision in the months that followed, starting with a stark production disparity. In 1941, Japan produced 5,088 aircraft, while the United States manufactured 19,433, nearly 4 times as many. By 1942, as Japan struggled to replace the 4 carriers lost at Midway, the U.S. commissioned the USS Essex, the first of a new class of fleet carriers that would eventually number 24 ships. Japan entered the conflict with 10 aircraft carriers, but after the devastation at Midway, it would never again operate more than 6 simultaneously. Meanwhile, the numbers turned decisively against them. By 1943, American factories were churning out approximately 8,000 to 9,000 aircraft every month. To put this in perspective, Japanese production for that entire year totaled only 16,000, meaning the United States produced more planes in 2 months than Japan could manage in 12. The speed of American wartime production was perhaps best exemplified by the SS Robert E. Peary, a Liberty ship constructed in a record-breaking 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. Although this feat, in November 1942, was a publicity demonstration, the industrial momentum was real. By 1943, American shipyards were completing 3 Liberty ships every 2 days, and in just the first 4 months of that year, they launched more merchant tonnage than Japan had built in 7 years of preparation. The disparity in aviation manufacturing was equally overwhelming, with the United States producing 96,000 aircraft in 1944 alone. The Ford Motor Company's Willow Run plant in Michigan produced complex B-24 Liberator bombers, each containing 1,550,000 parts, at a rate of 1 every 63 minutes around the clock. American assembly lines were effectively building heavy bombers faster than Japanese factories could produce the fighter planes required to intercept them. By late 1943, Japanese pilots were facing an enemy that operated with seemingly infinite resources, a reality that culminated in the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944. Task Force 58 deployed 15 carriers and 900 aircraft against a Japanese defense manned by hastily trained replacement pilots, resulting in a slaughter American aviators grimly dubbed the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, which cost Japan 2 more carriers and between 350 and 600 aircraft. The American industrial machine was now operating at a velocity that rendered continued Japanese resistance mathematically impossible, inflicting a psychological devastation on surviving pilots that matched their physical defeats. After the turning point at Midway, Japanese aviators wrote home in despair, questioning where the endless stream of enemy aircraft came from, and noting that for every plane they shot down, the sky filled with replacements, a phenomenon they recognized as industrial annihilation. By 1945, the strategic situation had become hopeless. Vital oil supplies captured in the Dutch East Indies were cut off from Japanese refineries by American submarines that severed supply lines faster than Japan could defend them. With hundreds of tankers lying on the ocean floor and fuel reserves depleted, the Imperial Navy, once the third largest in the world, was reduced to a static harbor defense force, unable to sortie. The elite cadre of pilots who had trained at Kagoshima Bay and executed the Pearl Harbor attack were almost entirely gone, replaced by young recruits with only months of training who were increasingly sent on desperate, one-way kamikaze missions. This shift signaled the final admission that conventional naval aviation had failed, making the atomic bombs that fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 a redundant, albeit devastating conclusion to a war already decided by industrial might. Japan's industrial infrastructure lay in ruins, its cities incinerated by conventional bombing, its navy obliterated, and its air force reduced to conducting desperate suicide missions. The empire that had launched the assault on Pearl Harbor, believing a 6-month campaign of victories would compel a negotiated peace, had instead provoked the total mobilization of an industrial superpower capable of production rates entirely beyond Japanese comprehension. The scale of American manufacturing was staggering. During the conflict, the United States produced 297,000 aircraft, 193,000 artillery pieces, 86,000 tanks, and 2 million army trucks. In contrast, Japan's total war production across most categories amounted to less than 10% of the American output, and in many specific sectors, it failed to reach even 5%. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's grim prediction that after 6 months of dominance he would have utterly no confidence in the war's outcome had been proven tragically correct. He was killed on April 18, 1943, when American fighters, guided by intercepted and decoded messages from the JN-25B code revealing his inspection itinerary, ambushed his transport aircraft over Bougainville. Although he did not live to witness the full scale of the catastrophe his operation had unleashed, he had understood the impossibility of the task from the very beginning. Having walked American streets and toured American factories, Yamamoto possessed a deep understanding of the nation's latent capacity. His ultimate gamble had been based on the hope that martial spirit and tactical skill might somehow overcome sheer industrial supremacy. But he was proven wrong. Surviving Japanese pilots, including Lieutenant Zenji Abe and others who executed the Pearl Harbor attack, spent decades processing the reality of what they had witnessed. They came to realize that the attack on Pearl Harbor was a brilliant tactical success that guaranteed a strategic defeat. They had not struck a weak, unprepared enemy, but a sleeping giant that, once awakened, possessed industrial power beyond anything they had imagined possible. The oil embargo that originally pushed Japan toward war was intended to contain its expansion, but instead, it triggered a conflict that exposed the true hierarchy of global industrial power. Japan, a nation that had modernized in merely 50 years to become a regional power, had recklessly challenged a nation with 17 times its gross national income, 5 times its steel production, and twice its population. Once American production was fully mobilized, the outcome was never in doubt. American industrial might accomplished exactly what Yamamoto had feared most, not primarily through superior strategy, but through simple, overwhelming, and relentless production. American factories constructed ships faster than they could be sunk, and industry produced aircraft faster than they could be shot down. Shipyards, aircraft plants, tank factories, and supply chains operated at a scale that rendered Japanese resistance increasingly futile with each passing month. By the time Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945, the nation was comprehensively defeated. The country that had struck in 1941 was vanquished not merely by American fighting spirit, but by an industrial capacity operating at percentages of global output that Japan could never hope to match. The pilots who attacked Pearl Harbor had indeed awakened a giant, and in the end, that giant had buried them in steel.